The Dark Night of the Soul, of Robins and Rebirth. Robins. Robins are friendly to humans. They can be hand-fed and also tamed. Hugh Warwick, for example, trained a robin in his back garden in the UK to eat from his hand. Male robins are territorial and fight other male robins, but they do no harm to humans or each other. So why is it that a superstition has lingered that robins are associated with death and are feared in some areas of the UK and Europe? Rebirth. At one time, the robin was a symbol of rebirth. Rebirth is associated with the symbolic element fire, which is red. And it is a stage in the spiritual path, generally called purgatory, because it is. In some shamanic and indigenous societies, the whole process was deliberately invoked with the aim of making young boys into men and putting them in touch with ancestral help, which is why only male robins attract this symbolism. Methods used. The Australian Aborigines, the Native American Indians, the Mayans, the Incas, the Aztecs, the Tibetan Buddhists, the Druids, and the Fakirs of India, seen here, all had methods designed to provoke a rebirth experience in men. They might be placed in pitch-black caves for several days, with the skeletons of their dead relatives. Or to become a dead relative for a new initiate if they failed, as this process was not safe. Or placed in barrows with their dead relatives. Or placed in sepulchres and crypts in graveyards. Or taken to the centre of pyramids and left for days on end with only a small air shaft to keep them alive. Or dumped in the desert for several days without food or water. Or placed on the top of very high mountains, all alone. Or left alone in the cold and the snow of an Arctic landscape. Or even left in the tunnels of old mines. These are the workings of Grimes graves, an old flint mine. And from these artificial caves they made artificial hills. The principal method used was sensory deprivation, but fasting was often added. And many initiates died because the process was so brutal. Some from terror, some from hypoxia, and when they died, they left them there. And that is why we find so many bones in all these places, many of whom were not very old. Who killed Cock Robin? Who killed Cock Robin? I, said the sparrow, with my bow and arrow. I killed Cock Robin. Who'll toll the bell? I, said the bull, because I can pull. I'll toll the bell. All the birds of the air fell a sighing and a sobbing when they heard the bell toll for poor Cock Robin. When they heard the bell toll for poor Cock Robin.
An example from Lane Deer Seeker of Visions, John Lane Deer and Richard Erdos. I was all alone on the hilltop. I sat there in the vision pit, a hole dug into the hill, my arms hugging my knees as I watched the medicine man who had brought me there disappear far down in the valley. He was just a moving black dot among the pines, and soon he was gone altogether. Here I was, crouched in my vision pit, left alone by myself for the first time in my life. I was 16 then, still had my boy's name, and let me tell you, I was scared. I was shivering, and not only from the cold. The nearest human being was many miles away, and 4 days and nights is a long time. Of course, when it was all over, I would no longer be a boy, but a man. I would have had my vision. I would be given a man's name. Sioux men are not afraid to endure hunger, thirst and loneliness, and I was only 96 hours away from being a man. The thought was comforting. Comforting, too, was the warmth of the star blanket which Old Man Chest had wrapped around me to cover my nakedness. My grandmother had made it especially for this, my first Habinalshire, my first vision-seeking. It was a beautifully designed quilt, white with a large morning star, made of many pieces of brightly coloured cloth. That star was so big it covered most of the blanket. If Wankanantanka, the Great Spirit, would give me the vision and the power, I would become a medicine man and perform many ceremonies wrapped in that quilt. Sounds came to me through the darkness, the cries of the wind, the whisper of the trees, the voices of nature, animal sounds, the hooting of an owl. Suddenly I felt an overwhelming presence. Down there with me in my cramped hole was a big bird. The pit was only as wide as myself, and I was a skinny boy, but that huge bird was flying around me as if he had white sky to himself. I could hear his cries, sometimes near and sometimes far away. I felt the feathers or a wing touching my back and head. This feeling was so overwhelming that it was just too much for me. I trembled and my bones turned to ice. I grasped a rattle with 40 pieces of my grandmother's flesh. It also had many little stones in it, tiny fossils picked up from an ant heap. Ants collect them. Nobody knows why. These little stones are supposed to have a power in them. I shook the rattle, and it made a soothing sound, like rain falling on rock. It was talking to me, but it did not calm my fears. I heard a human voice too, strange and high-pitched, a voice which could not come from an ordinary living being. All at once, I was way up there with the birds. The hill with the vision pit was way above everything. I could look down even on the stars, and the moon was close to my left side. It seemed as though the earth and the stars were moving below me. A voice said, "You are sacrificing yourself here to be a medicine man. In time you will be one. You will teach other medicine men. We are the fowl people, the winged ones, the eagles and the owls. We are a nation, and you shall be our brother. You will never kill or harm any one of us. You are going to understand us whenever you come to seek a vision here on this hill. You will learn about herbs and roots, and you will heal people. You will ask them for nothing in return. A man's life is short. Make yours a worthy one." I felt these voices were good, and slowly my fear left me. I had lost all sense of time. I did not know whether it was day or night. I was asleep, yet wide awake. Then I saw a shape before me. It rose from the darkness and the swirling fog which penetrated my earth hole. I saw this was my great-grandfather, Tasker Ushti, Leindeer, old chief of the Mini-Konju. I could see the blood dripping from my great-grandfather's chest, and where a white soldier had shot him, I understood that my great-grandfather wished me to take his name.
Rebirth and Christianity. Christianity initially accepted the rebirth process. St. Aran was a druid living on the island of Iona in Scotland's Inner Hebrides. He became a follower of St. Columba, who brought Christianity to Iona from Ireland in 563 AD. When St. Columba had repeated problems building the original Iona Abbey, St. Aran offered himself as a medium between the spirit world and the saint, and at his request was buried alive. He was later dug up and found to be still alive and had clearly had many spiritual experiences. He described the afterlife he had seen, but rather embarrassingly for the churchmen of the time, he said it involved no heaven or hell. So embarrassing were his visions that he was ordered to be covered up again. The building of the abbey went ahead, and St. Aran's chapel marks the spot where the saint was buried, alive. So the process was removed from the Christian system, and the robin acquired a new symbolic meaning. He became a symbol of Jesus. The robin's little red breast now represented the bloody breast of Jesus as he was pierced by the sword, and the holly of winter came to symbolise the crown of thorns, with its red berries as drops of blood. And by doing so, the new religion avoided all those embarrassing revelations, and not a few deaths of young men who were needed to fight crusades. The irony is that, of course, Jesus too was buried in a tomb, and after 3 days was resurrected.